Welcome to our podcast, Therapy on a Tangent. I'm Zori with my co-host, Natalie. Say hi, Natalie.
Hi, everyone.
And this is a podcast where two therapists nerd out about our geeky passions and mental health. So before we go into today's topic, Natalie, what have you been geeking out about?
Oh man, so at the time of this recording, we're just starting fall, kind of like leaves are starting to change and turn. So I've talked about how like some of the things that I've been doing in my attempt to like touch grass is to like go out and forage and like mushroom hunt and stuff. So this is actually the time of year where some like cool specialty gourmet mushrooms start to grow. So right now I'm kind of in the process of like, oh, should I wander into the woods and look for some mushrooms and see what's out there? So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing lately. I've been doing a little bit of research of like, oh, what trees do mushrooms grow on? So this has been what I've been doing lately.
I just had this image of you like wandering into the woods with like a red cape, like Little Red Riding Hood, and then some witch or like wolf comes and's like, my, what big eyes you have, Natalie.
I mean, it's not that different from there. My husband bought me like this cute little basket for me to like carry into the woods to look for mushrooms. And actually, you're supposed to use like a basket or like a mesh bag if you ever like harvest mushrooms because it drops the spores onto the ground and then you
Oh.
get more mushrooms and like next year around. So yeah, weird nerdy things, but it is not too far off from what you imagine in Little Red Riding Hood because you also need to be covered so that like the ticks and stuff don't get on you or like you can see it when the ticks get on you. So real life
Yeah, I
depictions.
was about to say, like, yeah, take me time I visit you, but now I'm like, nope, never mind.
The ticks kind of throw me off too, but yeah, it's okay. It's worth it sometimes.
Yeah, so for me, so I think I mentioned this, professor life can sometimes be busy. So I've been trying to be a little bit more intentional about reading for fun. I know, shocking. And one of the first books that I actually managed to get through for fun was a book actually by a friend. It's called Love Requires Chocolate. It's by my friend Raven Stringfield. And it's her first book. It's first book by like this big publisher that came out. It's in bookstores. It's totally cool. It's a cute little YA. It's not little. It's big. It's awesome. But it's a cute YA romance book about the main character Whitney Curry. She's studying abroad in France and Paris, and Josephine Baker is her idol, and she's basically doing this big project about her, this one woman show. And along the way, she kind of has this romance with her French tutor, and it's really
Mm.
cute. And I just really like it. So I'm not saying this because she's my friend, but like it's actually a really cute book. So I highly recommend it if you're looking for like a cute little um, um, book, especially with a black protagonist. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been into, trying to read more for fun, not just research stuff, but yeah.
Are you like a book person? Like you like to buy the physical books or do you get audiobooks?
Okay, so I'm a weirdo. I like both. I like to have the physical book, especially if I like it. But for this book, honestly, the only again, it's not a bad book, and it's not even a hard book because, like I said, it's YA, so it's for like high school, maybe even middle school reading level. So it's not a difficult book to read. It's not like reading Tolkien or something like that. But uh, sometimes, especially recently, sometimes my brain just like goes everywhere. And so, yes, I have to have sometimes an audiobook to get through an actual book. But sometimes I do read it as I'm listening to the audiobook. But this time I just had the audiobook because I did pre-order the book. I was a good friend. I pre-ordered the
Mm-hmm.
book, but I pre-ordered the book to my mom's house. So I haven't visited my mom in a few weeks. So by the time it was out, and I was like, oh, it's like everyone's reading this. I want to read it too. Um, I wasn't planning to visit my mom, so I just got the audiobook. And the audiobook, I will say, audiobook. the narrator is like kind of dry, kind of like, whatever. But the narrator, I'm forgetting their name, unfortunately. But the narrator for this audiobook was perfect, so great. So really recommend either the book or the audiobook. But yeah, I'm one of those people who I like to have physical representation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually have a whole lot of books that I have not read. They are just I like having books and I never find the time to read it. So really at this point I'm just collecting books and I've never read like maybe half maybe over half of the books that I own. But it's nice to like have physical
Oh,
books. Like audiobooks is like the easy way to go, but it's so nice just to have like physical books.
oh yeah, no, I definitely. There are some books on this bookshelf that are definitely collection. I mean, at one point I do want to read them, but yeah, I am definitely, buy more books, even though I haven't finished the books already in my TBR list. So,
Right.
yeah. But speaking of books and stuff like that, Natalie, at the time that we're recording this, it's about to be spooky month.
It's your favorite time of year.
It is. It is. So I just kind of wanted to talk about spooky stuff. More specifically, spooky movies, spooky TV shows, spooky games, and just kind of how that relates to mental health. So before we jump into that, Natalie, how do you feel about spooky stuff?
It's funny because I know that you love all the spooky stuff, but I am most definitely not a spooky person. So I don't do a whole lot of like horror movies or TV shows or games. I do indulge in some of them, and I think
Okay.
I think it'll be interesting to talk about why because I don't necessarily get the same enjoyment that probably you're getting from it or other people are. So I'm not a huge fan, but I do watch some like horror stuff. I'd also like to, as a disclaimer, I've never completed like a horror TV series either. And spooky movies, there are probably depending on how spooky, there are certain
Mhm.
spooky, more horror like movies that I don't actually finish either, or I miss parts of it. So yeah, and then games are kind of like a depends on what the theme of the game actually is. So that's kind of how I feel about them.
No, that's fair. Though I do like spooky stuff, I will admit there's like a limit. There's like a certain section genre of it. So if it's anything that's like too demony, too like, there's like no way of like really avoiding it, then I tend to avoid that type of stuff. I'm not. I'm more so into like the psychological thriller, the slasher. So like things like, and I mean I know that some of these have elements of like demons and stuff like that, but like, more so like things where at least there's this idea that you can run away, that you can physically take yourself out of it. So things like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Scream. Scream is one of my favorite series, and I think part of that is because it also has like comedy aspects to it, and also like the meta aspect of it. Like they're aware of certain horror movie tropes that I really appreciate, and especially as someone who, at one point in my life, I was like, maybe I'll go into like being a horror or media like analyst type of person who just like talks about like the different ways that media plays a role in things. And then I realized that probably wouldn't pay me that much, but yeah, I really like that in terms of like movies and TV shows, like things where it kind of, yes, it's scary, but it also has this like tongue in cheek moment to it. I guess camp is probably like the best term to use it, like horror meets camp. So I think some of the original seasons of American Horror Story are some of my favorite, especially the first season with the haunted house, and then Coven. Coven is like still, yes, I could rewatch that season. And then what else? Oh, one of my recent ones that I believe it came out earlier this year, if not towards the end of last year, Abigail. Abigail uh, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't seen Abigail, but I think they put it in the commercial, so it's not that much of a spoiler. But it's about this young girl who's actually a vampire, and actually, it's by if I'm correct, it's by the same creators as Ready or Not, which is another horror movie type thing where it's scary. There's definitely like scary elements to it, but it's also camp as well. So I think that's where I really like where it's scary but camp in terms of movies and TV shows. Um, and but video games, I think I lean in a little bit more into the spooky, but that's partially because I'm not playing the video
Mm.
games. So when I watch horror video games, I'm never really playing myself. It's usually watching a Let's Player, a YouTuber, or a Twitch player play them on by them, and I'm just watching the recording, and that's how I get through all the scary video games. Where I'm like, oh, I really want to know for like the plot what's happening because I love plot in video games, but I'm too afraid to play them myself.
It sounds like you're really good with things that give you like that degree of separation from the spooky stuff. And that's why like perhaps like the supernatural things you don't jive with as much because it's like how much can we really escape from like a demon or a ghost, right? But when it's like other spooky things like a haunted house or like even like video games having that slight bit of control over what you do, I feel like that's what probably is more up your alley where it's like it's plausible for me to escape from a situation like this.
Yeah, I think rationally that comes into play, and then also coming from a Christian background, there's still some things where I'm just like, nah, not gonna mess with Ouija boards, not
Mm,
gonna not gonna do that, not gonna mess with seances. So
yeah.
yeah, I think those things I tend to avoid because there was another movie that I never watched the movie as a whole by itself, and I'm forgetting the name. But I watch, you know, how sometimes movie reactions on YouTube, and I watched people talk about this movie, and I and I was glad that I watched them because I was like, again, if I watched this movie myself, I would not be able to make it through. But it's basically something with like a seance, and it's like a hand. I think it's like a Australian movie. It came out like last year, I think, or something like that. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but that type of movie I would not watch because I'm like, how can you run from a ghost? So or like I guess more specifically like a demon in that sense. But yeah, definitely. And I think that's why horror movie, spooky stuff is like a really interesting topic to talk about in terms of mental health. Because as we kind of been talking about in previous episodes, or at least in our first episode, how sometimes people are like, oh, you really like that? That's bad, or like, that's not good. But like everything in moderation, right?
Hmm.
And I think some of these horror movies, horror video games, horror shows can be really helpful. Just as you said, because there's that element of yes, this stuff is scary, but it's happening on screen. I can remove myself from it. And I think that's something really cool to think about.
Yeah, and I'm curious for
Um,
you, are you somebody who like laughs at like the horror movies and shows and stuff?
not, I mean, unless it's like obviously a joke, then I'll laugh, but I'm not laughing when someone gets like cut in half or something like that. I think there are certain things where we appreciate like a little bit of an adrenaline rush, right? But again, we want to know that we're safe, or at least for some people. There's some people who want that adrenaline junkie rush where they're like, no, I want to actually experience that. But I think there are some people like myself who wants that little bit of adrenaline, but don't necessarily want to actually put themselves in a dangerous position. And actually, I'm remembering all these things. There was this documentary that I watched on Hulu. It's, I think it was maybe called like the most haunted amusement park in America or something like that. But basically, it was part of what it was talking about. It was talking about a lot of things, but part of what it was talking about was how there are people who, you know, around Spooky Month, or even sometimes, I guess they happen even outside Spooky Month, but you know, those haunted houses where you go in and there's people dressed up and they're like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever. And apparently there's different levels. So there's places where there's no touch, where they'll just like jump out at you, but they won't touch you. And then there's like another level where like they'll jump out, they may like brush against you, they may like grass you like very quickly, but they're not going to hold on. And then there's other levels where they're going to like hold on. And obviously, there's a lot of legalese and stuff like that where you have to like sign your permission and make sure you're in good health and stuff like that. But in this documentary or this documentary series, they were talking about how for some people, especially who experience trauma, having those experiences where they can allow their adrenaline to rise but still know that they're safe, at least for some people, has been very therapeutic. And I thought that was really interesting to think about. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself as someone who has trauma unless you're um, saying that being born a black person in this country is trauma, which probably is. But in terms of like a specific trauma, I don't think I had that. But just still thinking about like some of our clients who oftentimes maybe feel numb because of their trauma as they process that. And again, I'm not saying that I would just be like, yeah, go watch a scary movie, but for some people that might be helpful to like have that situation where they know that they're safe, but they can allow their adrenaline to like rise, their heart to beat a little bit faster, but still know that they're in like a very safe space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in a way, it's kind of like exposure therapy. It's like you get like that safe exposure to it, and then you learn how to like cope and like tolerate with those things. It it does remind me. So one of the horror games that I do play whenever I go to like an arcade, there's usually like this 4D kind of experience game. Uh, the one that I see most often in arcades is called Dark Escape. I think there are other ones too, but it's 4D because on like the controller itself, it'll monitor your heart rate. There's something that also monitors like your respiration, like how you're breathing and stuff like that. And then they'll
Mm,
also do things to simulate what's happening in the game. And so like part of the game is that you have to like shoot down all these zombies, escape from this house, and you have to do it calmly too. So it tracks all these biometrics because if your like heart rate starts to spike or you start to breathe a little harder, it actually starts to like damage you so that you start to lose health
mm,
because of that. So I play that game not because I necessarily enjoy the horror aspect of it, but it's because I'm trying to see how much control I have over my body to be able to just like stay
mm-hmm,
calm in a situation. And so like for me that's like trying to do almost like an exposure therapy. Like I know I'm not good with like horror things and so I'm trying to get better of like just being calm, trying to not get affected by jump scares. So like this game is the easiest way for me to just be able to gauge like how well am I doing because it'll literally tell me like is my heart rate going up, am I breathing harder and
mm.
stuff like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that game before. I think that sounds really cool. I do know that there are some games where getting the platform where, but basically your controller has one of those what they call like sensors, basically, and it can tell when you're shaking and stuff like that. There's other games where you're supposed to hook your microphone to the game, and if you make any sound, make any noise during like the jump scares, then you have to start over again. So no, that makes sense. And I know that sometimes when I'm watching like really scary stuff, like stuff that is maybe more scary than I anticipated, but I've already started watching it, so I'm a completionist. I have to finish it. I know that sometimes if a character is covering their mouth, trying to like keep quiet, sometimes I'll hold my breath too to see if I could hold my breath. And then if I can, while they're like, "Oh no, I let out of breath," or "I let out of breath," I'm just like, "Ha! I would have survived." So no, I definitely get that. Like the like, can I test my limits type of thing? But again, in a very safe place.
Yeah. And I wonder how much that's what other people are doing too. Because I know there are lots of people who really pride themselves on being able to play some of these like horror games and be able to like get through them and stuff. So I wonder if part of it too is like they feel very accomplished as a person that like they're able to keep themselves calm and under control and be able to handle the stress, which I think is really great actually that people are trying to figure out how do they do that in their lives because
Mm-hmm.
I think like in the outside world it's a lot scarier to put yourself in a situation to like test your stress, your distress tolerance, I suppose. Whereas
Hmm.
like in the video game or even like in a movie or TV show, it's easier to like pause or stop or do something so that like you have time to like recalibrate, figure out how to cope. Whereas like in the outside world, it's like do it now or never.
Hmm. Yeah, and that made me think of one of my favorite YouTubers, Hollow. He so I think he said in multiple videos that he doesn't like horror video games. He doesn't, and yet so many of his video games, or at least so many of his videos, and at least from what I've seen, so many of his videos that do really well are horror. And he's always like, "I'm doing this for you guys," and I definitely can appreciate that because it's like it can be scary, but it's also been really interesting to see how like at the very beginning he would like scream at everything, but now he's a little bit more calm. I mean, sometimes he still screams, but he's a little bit more calm. And yeah, it's just it can be just really interesting to see like how much further you can go. I think also for me, something else that came to mind is and obviously there are some not so great things about this in terms of like diversity in horror movies, but at least for me in terms of watching them, I like the fact that hardly ever are there black people. And that allows like another element of withdrawing myself from it where I'm just like, see, I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with, so nope, nope, not me.
I've heard people say that like the reason why you don't see black people in some of these horror movies is because they know not to even get into those situations.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I definitely appreciate. Let me say this. I definitely appreciate that. Like Jordan Peele has been creating movies like Get Out. Was it Us? Right. Those I definitely love. I definitely like. Don't look. Is it don't? No, don't look up. Is Up. Up. That's the third movie that he made. And I definitely like those. And I definitely think again those are horror also I feel like those also fall into the camp area as well where like it makes sense and even though there are black people in those movies, even the black people in those movies are just like nope, why am I in this situation, how did I get into this situation? So I guess it's just also like a matter of like who's writing and how well they're writing the characters. And I think also that kind of brings into how some of these longer lasting series have been able to, withstand time. Like again, I said Scream is like one of my favorite series, and it's because you really like, especially the OG Scream, you really like the characters. You're really rooting for the characters, not only in terms of like surviving, but also in terms of like, oh, how's their relationship now between like the different movies and stuff like that. I know that when I watch some of the later of the original Scream trilogy, I was like, oh no, they broke up. Like these characters broke up, but they went through so much together. And even the latest Scream movies, I really like them. I really do. I'm sad that one of the main actresses of the recent Scream, she got fired because of basically protesting for Palestine and stuff like that. So obviously, if I think they are continuing with the third movie that they had planned, but just not with her. And I think also the other actress left too because of that reason. But so I probably won't watch that. But the Scream movies that have been out so far have been like really great, and I think they had that element of again horror, but also like camp, found family, those type of things. And even thinking about like Jordan Peele, there's always an element of like friendship, community, someone having your back, whether that's like friendship, family, those type of elements. And I think when I really think about that, I think that that is maybe the direction that hopefully a lot of horror movies. I mean, there's the horror movies that are just going to be like slasher just for
Mm-hmm.
the the effect of it. But I think the movies that are really going to last long are the ones who are really smart about like interweaving culture into things. Um, and and sometimes realizing that culture can be like the most scariest part of those movies. And I think it's also really important to think about how sometimes horror movies are like a twisted reflection of society's worries and what society or what the culture is currently concerned about. Because I know if we like look back at some older, not even like movies, but even horror stories, a lot of it had to do with gender roles, gender expectations, and it was only when those people didn't meet those gender roles or gender expectations that things started to get spooky, things started to get haunted, that those type of things. So I'm thinking about again like some of those newer movies that like the Jordan Peele's and where it yes it's scary whatever is going on, whether it's a monster, whether it's a group of people, it's scary, but also the message, the central message, the societal message is also scary in itself as well. It may not be scary for everyone because I remember being in the theaters for Get Out, so pre-pandemic days, where wasn't really worried about going to the theaters. But I remember being in the theater for Get Out, and there were parts where I was terrified, and maybe it was also because I was in a predominantly white theater.
Mm-hmm.
There was like I think there was like maybe two or three other like black people in the movie. I do remember kind of like looking back at them like, are you scared? I'm scared. And I remember leaving the movie. This white guy was just like, was that scary? And I was like, yes, it was scary. So scary. Like, don't touch my body, type of thing. So I think there's a lot of ways that movies, TV shows, video games can be scary. And though, the classic tropes are really, they work. I think I'm also getting more interested in seeing how like people can like expand beyond those classic tropes and potentially what they also have to say about like what's going on in the world. Because like even when you think about zombie movies, for example, um, like yeah there was like historically people misconceptions around like what other cultures were doing in regards to the dead bodies and stuff like that, but also like at least recently zombie movies often have to do with like global health related issues or pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Like when the pandemic first started, my first thought was like, oh my gosh, are we all going to turn zombies? Do I need to like figure out how to survive this? I don't
Yeah,
think
it's
I
like
can
I've
survive
watched
this.
that movie before. Like I know how this ends.
I know. So, yeah, I think also, yeah, like I said, horror movies, spooky movies can, or not just movies, but media in general can be a reflection of like what's going on in the world. And I think that's also something to think further about. Like the Babadook. That was scary.
I
And
have
you
no
probably
idea
never
what the
saw
Babadook
spoiler.
is.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, Natalie. Okay. So like spoilers. It's been out for a while, so, but still spoilers for people. The Babadook had to do a lot with the grieving process with this woman whose husband died, and now she's a single mother raising their only child. Their child has issues as well. He doesn't really have friends. He has a hard time socializing and stuff like that. And essentially, the Babadook is like a physical manifestation of her grief, of her depression. And I think that's also so interesting to think about. And honestly, until like the very end of the movie, you hardly ever really see this like scary monster. If anything, you see this woman turning into a very scary monster throughout the movie and like, yelling at her son and stuff like that. But when you really think about it, it's about grief. It's about depression, which I think is really another really interesting to think about and really interesting to think about how they show that. Also, the LGBTQ plus community has like adopted the Babadook as a queer figure, but I think that was mostly like a happy circumstance where someone on Netflix, whoever was controlling the Netflix, put the Babadook under LGBTQ plus, and you know we just ran with it. So, but yeah, I think I also really enjoy the movies that make me think a little bit, also scare me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point because I think the reason why we watch movies or like TV shows or like play video games is because like something in there resonates with us. And I can see with like horror movies being a reflection of like society. And then I think there's something that's probably really hopeful when you get to like the end of some of those things where it's like we survived a zombie apocalypse. It makes you feel hopeful of like, oh, maybe as a society we'll survive what we're going through now and it'll be okay. And so maybe that's the piece of it that perhaps people enjoy. That we're gonna go through some stuff. It's gonna be hard. We're probably gonna have some casualties along the way, but it'll be okay. So it feels almost like a way of like reaching for hope for people.
Yeah, for some. I'm thinking of Saw. Saw does not feel hopeful.
Well, I guess that's true too.
But
Then,
yeah,
yeah, I guess I'm curious. Then, like, I don't know what. Then what do you think people are getting out of those kinds of movies where there isn't really like a happy ending or I guess like a triumphant kind of ending?
yeah. I mean, I think it says a lot. I think it kind of one shows that unfortunately somewhere in the world, maybe not exactly what's happening in Saw, but that there's still like a dark side of humanity that we need to like be aware of and recognize. Um, I think again, going back to like, individuals who may want that like exposure, but again want to be safe, it can provide that. So I think sometimes those type of movies can one kind of be a reflection of not only like fears that are current that may happen, like future fears, and hopefully how we could navigate around those fears, as you were saying, but also I think it shows like these are very relevant fears, um, that we have now, and that maybe they don't necessarily have a happy ending, and maybe as depressing as it sounds, like this is the reality of human nature to a certain extent. Not like everyone is a killer or anything, but that there are pockets, um, of people, no matter what the culture, no matter the country of origin, whatever, who are just bad people. Um, and realizing that, unfortunately, that's the reality of the world.
I think that's tough because I think in the day and age that we live in, sometimes what makes counseling hard is when you encounter these like fears and worries that people have that are more like existential, that's just part of like who we are as humans, as a society. And then there's like absolutely nothing that we can do about it, and we have to learn how do we live even though there's always going to be like a possibility of threats around us. And I think that's a hard thing. Like from a counselor's standpoint, it's like I don't know what to say in those situations. Like when somebody
Mm-hmm.
tells me that like, oh, there's been like an uptick of like serial killers in my neighborhood, like people like bodies are just turning up, and like I'm scared. And it's like, what do I say to that? I'm just like, that's just human existence. There are just bad people out there in the world, and then you have to learn how to exist regardless of those things that are happening. But it doesn't feel good to say that, right? And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the movies also reflect that. It's like, yeah, this is just what the world is, and we have to learn like how do we still live our lives even though there's things like evil in the world or like people with irrationally bad intentions and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I think kind of going back to my avoidance of things with like demons and stuff, I think that's probably why, because it doesn't really have, oftentimes those movies don't often have like a hopeful part to it. And I think when you're already dealing with the realities of the world and like with things that you see on the news and stuff like that, I guess for me, I want that hope. Even if, again, like movies like Scream or Final Fantasy, wait, yeah, no, Final Destination, sorry,
Final Fantasy,
or
totally
Final
different
Fantasy.
thing.
It's totally different. Final Destination, that's what I mean. Even sometimes when they end on a cliffhanger where they're just like, oh no, have you actually avoided the thing? It's still kind of fact that they got through the whole movie and they survived still kind of leaves a little bit of hope, you know. So yeah, I think that's kind of why I try to avoid like the super demonic type stuff because usually if it does have some element of a happy part, it's like very bittersweet. It's like still someone died, but and I mean, I guess in a lot of these horror spooky, a lot of people die, but like it's very bittersweet. It's not like it's not satisfying for me, versus other movies where at least you know that one person who you're rooting for, who you're like, yes, you need to be the final girl, you need to be the final person, you know. Um, at least those kind of give hope. So yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I was thinking about like some of the other things that you said that you enjoy with like the horror TV shows and movies and things like that. I was thinking about like you mentioned American Horror Story, and I did actually watch I think the first season of it, and it definitely freaked me out. Don't get me wrong, I was so freaked out. I had to watch it with like the lights on, daytime, everything. But for
Hmm.
me, I think there's something about it where it felt like I was curious about maybe human nature or why people do the things that they do. Um, and I think that's kind of an interesting way to, I guess, like understand humanity. Those,
Hmm.
like, why do people do bad things, basically? Because I
Hmm.
think, like, in American Horror Story, we do follow some characters and try to understand, I guess, what was happening. So part of it was just it's a haunted house. But I think
Hmm.
part of like horror, watching horror too, I think people have the curiosity of like getting into the mind of like a killer or somebody who's like doing these evil acts in the world. So at least for me, like that was a curiosity, and I wanted to know more about it, but also again have that degree of separation where it's like I'm not in a situation where I have to think about is the person in front of me like what are their intentions, how are they going to kill me, how do I escape,
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah, I again, the early seasons of American Horror Story are some of my favorite because of what you just said, and also because of the camp. But I think because the creator of American Horror Story, I think he is a gay man, or he at least part of the LGBTQ plus community. I think what I really also like about American Horror Story is like it's like not perfect found family elements that I believe at least were in the haunted house, the coven, and then a hotel. I didn't. I kind of watched Freak Show. I yeah, I guess it was in Freak Show as well. I didn't watch Asylum. That one, for whatever reason, I think that one got too weird for me. Probably, like I said, I mean, there's demons in all of them, but like, I don't know, that one I just
What was like the
never got
line
through it.
for
But
you in there?
I think I don't know. I think anything when it comes to like religion and demons, that just makes it feel extra scary. And again, coming from like a Christian background, there's still stuff where I'm like, nah, I don't mess with that. Um, so yeah, I think American Horror Story, or at least the earlier seasons, were really good in terms of, I mean, of exploring and making these characters more than just 2D. You may still not like their reasoning or their thought process behind things, but at least you can understand them a little bit better. Now, I'm not saying that I will ever like support or understand a serial killer, but like it's not just like, oh, you know, it just happened this way. You can see the some of the environmental things that happened, put it in context and understand. And I guess especially as like a mental health professional, obviously there's some things where we'll probably just never understand, or at least not in our time. But there are some things where you're just like, oh yes, environment for some people, not all people, because there's some people who are have been in like really bad environments growing up, and they're still really great people. They follow the laws, they don't kill anyone, but you know, there are some environments where you're just like, oh, okay, you know, this potentially makes sense, you know, from a therapeutic approach. So I think that's another reason why I really like some of the American Horror Story elements because even the bad guys, the people who you still don't want to root for, it's interesting to just understand where they came from.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that helps people shift out of like that black and white thinking that we're always trying to encourage our clients to get out of in therapy, because
Hmm.
it, I think sometimes in our minds it's like bad people are just bad people, and then that's it. They were born bad.
Hmm.
They're always gonna be bad, and I think it's easy for our brains to process that and like make that black and white because then we don't have to think harder. We don't have to feel any
Hmm.
differently about somebody. But I think there's something important about being able to like still understand and empathize about like maybe why somebody got to where they are, because that is part of like humans, right? I don't
Hmm.
think, and then perhaps this is more philosophical than anything, but I don't think anyone is born into the world wanting to be the bad guy, you know? And so I think it's important for people to understand that like stuff happens in people's lives. It doesn't necessarily make their actions okay, right? But I think we need to be able to empathize that like not everybody wanted to be in this position that they're in, right? Sometimes it's like trauma, sometimes it's like their upbringing, and I think it just helps people like just empathize with people better and not, I guess, like go all in and like demonize somebody, because I think in the society that we live in today, it's easy to just demonize somebody. And
Hmm.
especially with cancel culture, it's like demonize, cancel, and then that's it, right? And it's so simple.
Yeah.
But then I think that dismisses that like people are more complex, things happen, and we need to have some empathy for that, because also shifting out of that black and white thinking allows us to believe that like something could change with somebody, right? People are capable of change. Maybe they won't be like this forever. So I think that's why that's important, to be able to like understand how do people get to where they are, but not necessarily have to agree with like their actions.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point because sometimes I have clients who are just like, oh, well, now I understand where they're coming from and I can be empathetic, so I guess I should forgive them. And no, there's sometimes where you should not forgive someone. You don't need to forgive someone to move on and have a healthier life. I think, unfortunately, we as a culture have gotten to this idea that in order to move on, to have closure, you need to forgive someone. And sometimes there's people who forgiveness may not be the healthiest thing for you, for your mental health. And I think, as you said, having those like gray characters, those um, gray elements of understanding people can be really helpful in understanding, like, yes, I understand where you're coming from. That is tragic. I can, like have empathy for that, but also realize that we are all in control of our actions. We are all in control of what we do. And therefore, just because I can have empathy, that doesn't necessarily mean that empathy equals forgiveness. And I think, at least for a lot of the clients that I work with, some of them who are struggling with that, that's important to realize.
Yeah, and I think it's more about like protecting your peace in a way, because then
Mm-hmm.
it's like when you have the openness of like I understand where somebody's coming from, I don't agree with their actions, maybe they'll change. I think at least that means that like you don't have to harbor that forever. Like this is just an evil person that done an awful thing to me, but it's like, all right, well, I guess life was hard for them. I will let them go about their way and figure their stuff out, and it doesn't have to bother me anymore. Like that protects your
Mm-hmm.
peace, because it's like I didn't do anything to
Yeah.
cause that. It's their own stuff.
Yeah. And again, realizing that they themselves have to make the decision to change, and that, again, part of protecting your peace, part of having healthy boundaries is realizing that you don't necessarily need to be part of that change. I mean, there may be some certain situations where that may be appropriate, but um, again, just like we can't control what our clients do, no one can control what anyone else does. So, yeah, awesome. Anything else that's coming to mind for you, Natalie? I know you said that, this isn't really your favorite topic, but
Yeah, I mean it's not my favorite topic, but I do do some of the horror things. Just I think a lot of it for me is just like curiosity more than anything. That's why like I don't actually complete anything. It's like I got what I got, what I needed out of it, and then that's it. Like a little bit exposure, a little bit of testing my competency to handle stressful situations, and now I'm good. I can move on with my life.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like I said before, I like spooky stuff, but a part of it is just that knowing that I'm safe, knowing that I don't have to go out into the spooky woods and stuff like that. But I guess also, as you said, kind of testing like, can I hold my breath longer than the person? Would I be able to survive? Probably not, but I like to think I can. But yeah, great conversation, Allie. Thank you for entertaining my spooky season month desires. I hope this was great for you all as listeners as well. And yeah, nothing more to say. So hope you join us for the next episode and stay on tangent, folks.
Yeah, see y'all next
Bye.
time. Bye.